On an ordinary morning in the sleepy little town of Willow Creek, an 88-year-old man stepped into a bank with a simple request, but his weathered papers sparked suspicious glances, mocking whispers, and public humiliation. No one could have guessed that a single phone call from a stranger would shake the Pentagon itself, bringing a four-star general to the scene and unraveling a story that left the entire town speechless. What happened? Gather close and listen to a tale of loyalty, sacrifice, and a lesson no one will ever forget. Beneath the soft golden glow of a gentle morning in Willow Creek, ancient oak trees swayed, casting warm, dappled light across the main street. Dry leaves crunched under the slow, steadfast steps of Frank Delaney, an 88-year-old man carrying the weight of an era in his soul. His faded cotton shirt, worn thin at the shoulders but pressed crisp, clung to his frail frame. On his head sat a weathered baseball cap, embroidered with USMC veteran, its colors dulled by time, a quiet badge of pride. His black leather shoes, polished to a shine that very morning in his modest kitchen, clicked steadily on the sidewalk. In his hand, he clutched an old leather wallet, its deep creases telling a story of over half a century gone by. He paused for a moment outside the corner bakery, breathing in the faint scent of fresh-baked bread, a flicker of old memories stirring within. A faint smile crossed his lips, and he walked on. The Willow Creek Bank loomed ahead, its gleaming glass facade and polished brass sign catching the morning light. This was the same bank where Frank had opened an account over 50 years ago. Fresh from the battlefield, his hands still trembling with the echoes of war. Today, he came with a humble purpose to withdraw a small sum, just enough to help his granddaughter Emily, an 18-year-old with a radiant smile, pay her college tuition. The thought of Emily, her voice bright with promise, "Grandpa, I'm going to study so hard," brought a sting to the corners of his eyes. He pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lobby, where the air carried the faint scent of printer paper and floor polish. A handful of customers stood in line, the steady tap of keyboards echoing from the teller's counters. Frank approached counter 3, where a young teller with blonde hair tied high was sorting through a customer's documents. He waited patiently, his gnarled hands clasped in front of him, his gaze drifting to a bulletin board on the wall, though his mind wandered elsewhere to days long gone, to comrades who once stood shoulder to shoulder. When his turn came, he offered a gentle smile, his voice low and warm, steeped in a lifetime of experience. "Good morning, miss. I'd like to withdraw a little money." He opened his wallet and pulled out two fragile, time-worn documents, relics of a bygone era. A faded blue military ID, bearing a black-and-white photo of a 20-year-old Frank. His eyes bright, his face untouched by time's heavy hand. And a certificate of honor from the United States Marine Corps, its ink faded but legible, a testament to silent sacrifices. The teller, whose name tag read Jessica, took the papers, her brow furrowing slightly. She flipped the ID over, glanced at Frank, then back at the photo, her eyes betraying a flicker of doubt. "This is you." Her voice wavered, tinged with awkwardness. Frank nodded, calm as ever, his deep eyes holding an ocean of memories. "Yes. Ma'am, I've aged a bit," but Jessica didn't respond right away. She waved over a colleague, a bespectacled young man named Brian, and the two began whispering, their eyes fixed on the documents. Brian held the military ID up to the light, shook his head, and muttered, "This photo's too old. And this certificate, I'm not sure it's even valid." Frank stood there, feeling the weight of curious stares from other customers. The air in the bank's lobby grew thick, as if every sound had faded, leaving only the slow, steady beat of his heart and a familiar pang, the sting of being forgotten, rising quietly within him. The air in the Willow Creek Bank's lobby turned stifling, as if time itself had slowed, pressing down on Frank Delaney's frail shoulders. He stood there, his gnarled hands still clasped tightly, his gaze steady, but hiding a quiet, familiar pain, a scar reopened after decades. Jessica, the teller, slid his worn documents back across the counter, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Her voice was cold, impatient. "We need more valid ID. These are too old." Brian, her colleague, leaned in, his tone laced with mockery. "The guy in this photo's at least 60 years younger than you." A loud chuckle erupted from the line of waiting customers. A middle-aged man in a gray suit couldn't hold back, barking out. "Bet this grandpa borrowed his great-grandpa's ID." The laughter spread, sharp as a blade, slicing through Frank's silent dignity. Eyes turned toward him, some curious, some scornful, but not a single voice spoke in his defense. Jessica waved for security. A burly man in a dark blue uniform strode over, his voice blunt. "Sir, can you leave? We don't accept fakes here." Frank lifted his head, ready to explain, but the words never came. "We don't have time for this," the guard snapped, pointing toward the door as if Frank were some common troublemaker. Frank didn't argue. He quietly gathered his papers, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the old military ID, where the young face of a long-ago Frank stared back, a reminder of years the world had forgotten. The crowd began to murmur. An elderly woman whispered to her neighbor, "Look at him, probably trying to scam the bank." A young woman clutching her phone snapped a quick photo, her lips curling into a smirk. The lobby now buzzed with judgment, and Frank, a man who'd once faced bullets and bombs, stood in the eye of a storm of public humiliation. He didn't lash out or raise his voice. There was only a deep, aching sadness, as if he'd long grown used to the world turning its back. Slowly, he turned and walked toward a bench near the entrance, where sunlight streamed through the glass doors, casting golden patches on the cold stone floor. He sank onto the seat, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the street outside, where cars glided past. But in his heart, memories of war flooded back days leading his men through sheets of gunfire, freezing nights in dense forests, where he'd vowed to survive and return home. Now, at 88, all he wanted was to help his granddaughter. Yet even that small wish was drowned in doubt. The whispers in the lobby droned on, but Frank no longer heard them. He retreated into his own world, where fallen comrades still lived, where loyalty and honor once meant everything. And there, at least, he wasn't branded a fraud. In the Willow Creek bank's lobby, the whispers droned on like small, relentless waves crashing against Frank Delaney's heart. He sat on the waiting bench, still as a statue, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed through the large glass window, where cars sped by on the street, carefree and hurried. But he wasn't truly seeing them. His mind drifted to days long past, where smoke and gunfire were his companions, where he stood tall, leading his men through storms of death. Now, at 88, all he wanted was to do one small thing for his granddaughter Emily. Yet even that was buried under suspicion and shame. The lobby's air remained heavy, the faint scent of printer paper and floor polish blending into a cold, distant atmosphere. Curious, mocking glances from the crowd still darted toward Frank, but no one approached, no one asked. He was used to this kind of solitude, but today it cut deeper, a fresh wound on an old scar. Then, from the crowd, a woman stepped forward, middle-aged, with brown hair tied low. She wore a dark green coat, her face stern, but her eyes burning with resolve. This was Melissa Harper, no stranger to stories like Frank's. The daughter of a veteran, a volunteer at a veterans support center. She knew the worth of the weathered papers Frank carried. She'd watched the whole scene unfold, Jessica's suspicious stare, Brian's mocking words, the guard's curt gesture. Each word, each action, stabbed at her like a knife. She couldn't stand by. Melissa marched to the counter, her voice calm but unwavering. "Those documents are valid in the military system. You need to verify them properly instead of jumping to accusations." Jessica shrugged, her eyes glued to her computer screen. "We're just following protocol, ma'am." Brian chimed in, his tone dismissive. "If he had legit ID, we'd have processed it already." Melissa took a deep breath, swallowing her anger. She glanced back at Frank, seeing him sit there, silent, as if he'd accepted it all. But she wouldn't. She pulled out her phone, snapped quick photos of Frank and the documents on the counter, then stepped to a quieter corner of the lobby. With swift, practiced motions, she dialed the hotline for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, her voice clear and steady. I'm at Willow Creek Bank. A veteran is being treated unfairly. His name's Frank Delaney, and he's got his military ID and a certificate of honor. I'm sending the photos now. On the other end, a calm, steady voice asked her to hold while they verified. Melissa turned back, standing near Frank, her eyes seeming to say, "You're not alone?" Frank lifted his head, catching her gaze. He gave a faint nod, a small but meaningful gesture, as if sensing the fragile spark of hope she carried. Meanwhile, the lobby hummed with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the woman quietly shifting the course of this story and the silent veteran waiting, carrying a forgotten history in his heart. Time crawled slowly in the Willow Creek Bank's lobby, each second heavy, weighing down the already tense air. Frank Delaney sat on the waiting bench, his frail hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the street outside. But his mind wandered through faded memories where gunfire mingled with the laughter of comrades, the mocking words, suspicious glares, and public humiliation from the crowd no longer seemed to reach him. He was used to being forgotten, used to the world seeing him as a faint shadow of the past. But in the corner of the lobby, Melissa Harper, the woman with resolute eyes, stood firm, phone pressed to her ear, awaiting a response from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Her gaze never left Frank, as if shielding him from the crowd's harsh stares. The whispers in the lobby had softened, but judgment still hung like a dark cloud. Jessica and Brian, the bank tellers, went about their work, though their eyes occasionally flicked toward Frank, a mix of unease and indifference in their glances. Suddenly, a phone on the counter rang, shattering the uneasy silence. Jessica picked it up, her voice polite but tinged with fatigue. "Willow Creek Bank, how may I help you?" On the other end, a deep, cold, commanding voice cut through, making her sit up straight. "This is Colonel John Whitaker, Office of Veterans Affairs, calling from Washington, D.C. I demand an immediate halt to any disrespectful treatment of Mr. Frank Delaney, Sergeant Major, a two-time veteran of Korea and Vietnam, United States Marine Corps." Jessica froze, her hand gripping the receiver tightly. She glanced at Brian, whose eyes widened in confusion. The voice continued, giving her no chance to respond. "An honor delegation is en route to your bank. Prepare to receive them. I want to speak to your manager now," Jessica stammered, fumbling to transfer the call to Mr. Thompson, the branch manager, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor. Thompson emerged from his office, took the phone, and his face grew pale as he listened. He nodded repeatedly, his voice trembling. "Yes, sir. We'll handle it immediately. I apologize for the misunderstanding." The call ended, but the lobby's atmosphere had shifted. Thompson turned to Jessica and Brian, his voice low but urgent. "Who handled Mr. Delaney's transaction?" Both tellers bowed their heads, silent. Thompson's eyes found Frank still sitting quietly on the bench, and for the first time, he realized this man was no ordinary customer. Melissa, standing nearby, allowed a faint smile to cross her lips. Sensing the story's tide turning, Frank, seemingly unaware of the commotion, remained still, his deep eyes holding an ocean of memories. But somewhere within him, a small spark of hope began to flicker, like sunlight piercing through thick clouds, heralding something momentous on the horizon. The air in the Willow Creek Bank's lobby froze as if the world itself held its breath. The whispers had died, replaced by a taut silence, broken only by the steady tick of the wall clock. Frank Delaney sat on the waiting bench, his frail hands resting on his knees, his deep eyes gazing out at the street, where the pale golden sunlight faded into dusk. He knew nothing of the call from Washington, D.C., or the honor delegation on its way. He simply sat, silent, carrying a forgotten history and a quiet sorrow for a world that had moved on. Melissa Harper, standing in the corner, clutched her phone tightly, her eyes alight with hope. She sensed something monumental approaching, like a mighty wind ready to sweep away the fog of doubt. Manager Thompson, pale and flustered, whispered urgently to Jessica and Brian, scrambling to undo their mistake. But before anyone could act, a low, rumbling sound echoed from outside, like the growl of a military machine. Heads turned, eyes fixed on the large glass doors. A sleek black SUV, gleaming and unmarked, pulled up silently in front of the bank. Its door swung open, and a commanding figure stepped out. It was General Robert Callahan, a 4-star general, his crisp navy blue uniform adorned with gleaming medals, his face stern, yet radiating the presence of a born leader. Behind him followed 2 senior officers, their postures rigid, their gazes icy. The lobby seemed to stop breathing. Jessica dropped her pen, Brian stood rooted, and Thompson forgot how to blink. Customers, security, and everyone stood frozen. Their eyes locked on the general as he strode through the glass doors, his polished boots striking the stone floor with deliberate, resounding steps. No one spoke, no one moved. General Callahan paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Frank. He approached, each step carrying the weight of history. The crowd parted, instinctively stepping back, caught in the force of his presence. Standing before Frank, the general snapped to attention, raising his hand in a slow, solemn military salute. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the silent space with reverence. "Sir, it is an honor to stand before you. Forgive us for forgetting who you are." Frank, for the first time that morning, lifted his head, his eyes, deep as an ocean, met the general's. He said nothing, only gave a faint nod, but in that moment, an unspoken bond formed like 2 soldiers, decades apart, speaking the language of honor. Melissa, in the corner, felt her throat tighten. She brushed away a tear, her heart swelling with pride. In the lobby, the whispers were gone, and the suspicious glances vanished. There was only silence now, and a belated reverence for a man who had given everything and never asked to be remembered. The Willow Creek Bank's lobby remained steeped in silence, as if every sound from the outside world had been swallowed by the solemn moment unfolding. General Robert Callahan stood before Frank Delaney, his eyes still radiating profound respect, as if gazing at a living symbol of courage. Frank, with his deep eyes holding an ocean of memories, gave a faint nod, a small gesture that spoke volumes. The crowd in the lobby, from bank staff to customers, stood frozen, their eyes locked on the 2 men as if witnessing a page of history being turned. Melissa Harper, in the corner, quietly wiped away a tear, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. Manager Thompson, Jessica, Brian, and even the security guard who had once pointed Frank toward the door now bowed their heads, their faces etched with shame and regret. General Callahan turned, his icy gaze sweeping the room, and spoke, his voice low but resonant, like an unyielding command. "Frank Delaney is not just a veteran, he is a hero. In the Korean War and Vietnam, he served as a logistics commander, leading over 40 soldiers to safety through enemy territory in a mission the newspapers never wrote about. He refused all accolades, choosing to live quietly as an ordinary citizen. But today, we will not let him be forgotten, not one moment longer." His words struck like hammer blows, shattering every doubt, every mocking whisper that had filled the lobby. Jessica trembled, her hands clenched, while Brian took a step back as if trying to hide from the crowd's gaze. Thompson stepped forward, his voice quivering. "Sir, we're so sorry. We didn't know." Frank lifted his head, his voice soft but clear, ringing out in the lobby for the first time. "It's all right. I just wanted to withdraw some money for my granddaughter." The simple words carried a weight that silenced the room, a reminder that he sought neither glory nor recognition, only to do what was right, as he always had. Callahan nodded, a glint of admiration in his eyes. He turned to Thompson. "Starting today, this branch will establish a special identification protocol for veterans, with Mr. Delaney's case as the example. No veteran will ever be treated like this again." The crowd nodded quietly, some beginning to murmur, but this time their words carried respect. Jessica and Brian, their faces flushed, stepped forward and bowed their heads to Frank. "We were wrong, sir. Please forgive us," they said. Frank gave a slight nod, his eyes free of anger, holding only a distant sadness as if he were long accustomed to being misunderstood. Melissa approached, her eyes warm. "You're an incredible man, sir," she said. Frank offered a faint smile, his first true smile of the morning, genuine and kind. "Thank you, young lady." The truth had been laid bare, but the lesson it left behind was greater still. The lobby, once a place of humiliation, had transformed into a space of awakening, where everyone came to see the value of loyalty, sacrifice, and the quiet stories behind every veteran. The Willow Creek Bank's lobby now basked in a different kind of silence, not tense or judgmental, but a quiet born of awakening, of belated reverence. General Robert Callahan stood tall, his commanding presence unwavering, his eyes still fixed on Frank Delaney. The 88-year-old man with a silent history etched in his deep gaze. Frank, after all that had transpired, remained on the waiting bench, his frail hands resting on his knees, his face as calm as a still lake. He hadn't asked for recognition or demanded apologies. All he wanted was to do a small thing for his granddaughter Emily, and now, with the truth laid bare, he remained as humble as ever. Melissa Harper, in the corner, wore a quiet smile, her heart brimming with pride and emotion. She looked at Frank, a man who, just hours ago, had been branded a fraud, now honored as a hero. Manager Thompson, Jessica, Brian, and the security guard stood with bowed heads, their faces heavy with remorse. General Callahan stepped forward, placing a hand on Frank's shoulder, his voice warm yet resolute. "Sir, we will ensure your story is remembered." Frank gave a faint nod, his eyes briefly meeting the general's before settling on Melissa. He rose slowly and walked to the counter, where Jessica, her face flushed, hurried to process his request. She handed him the money, her voice trembling. "Sir, thank you for everything." Frank didn't reply, only offered a gentle smile, one that carried both forgiveness and a distant sadness. He turned to Melissa, nodding, his eyes conveying a thank you no words could capture. Then he walked out of the bank, his frail figure fading beyond the glass doors, as if the storm of that morning had never happened. But the story didn't end there. In the wake of the incident, Willow Creek Bank erected a small plaque in the main lobby, inscribed with the words, "In honor of the forgotten, who never asked to be remembered." The modest plaque became a permanent reminder of loyalty, sacrifice, and the costly lessons of hasty judgment. Each year, on Veterans Day, a bouquet of white flowers, pure as belated gratitude, is placed on the bench where Frank once sat. Frank never returned to the bank, but his story spread, a quiet flame illuminating the hidden corners of Willow Creek, and somewhere, in a small wooden house. He sat with Emily, listening to her dreams of college, his eyes bright with pride, as if the trials of that day were merely a passing breeze, too fleeting to sway the heart of a soldier. As the sun dipped below the horizon in the quiet town of Willow Creek, Frank Delaney's story lingered, a soft echo reminding us of loyalty, sacrifice, and the power of compassion. An 88-year-old man who once faced bullets and saved dozens of comrades, stood tall against suspicion and humiliation. Yet it was his patience and humility that ignited a profound lesson. Melissa, with her courage and heart unwilling to stand idly by, shifted the course of this tale. General Callahan, with solemn respect, restored justice, and the Willow Creek Bank, once a place of judgment, became a symbol of awakening. But above all, this is Frank's story. A man who never asked to be remembered, yet deserves to be honored forever. Each white bouquet placed on the bench where he sat is not just a tribute to him, but a promise we will not let silent heroes fade into oblivion. If this story has touched your heart, share it with those you love. Let Frank's tale spread, lighting up the hidden corners of gratitude and respect. And if you're moved by stories like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and never miss a moment. Together, let's keep stories like Frank's alive forever.